everyone, in this video, we will be discussing how to write good functions. Functions are the fundamental building blocks of any program, and it is essential to write them in a way that is easy to read, test, and maintain. We will be looking at some of the key points to consider when writing clean functions, and we will use JavaScript examples to illustrate each point. Let's dive in. Meaningful names. We went into great detail about names in a previous video. Nonetheless, discussing function naming is essential. The name of a function should describe what it does and be precise. A good name makes it easier to read and understand the code. For example, naming a function calculate circle area instead of calculate. The name of the function clearly states its purpose, and it's easy to understand what it does. Another example is naming a function add numbers instead of naming it sum. Function arguments. Functions should take in as few arguments as possible. Ideally, a function should take 0 arguments. However, if a function requires more than 2 or 3 arguments, consider using an object instead. For example, instead of passing name, email, password, age, and country, you can pass a user object that includes all of the information mentioned. Function length. Functions should be kept short, ideally under 20 lines of code. Long functions are challenging to read and maintain. Also, a function should do one thing and do it well. If a function is doing more than one thing, consider splitting it into multiple functions. Here's an example. In this bad example, getUserInfo function has multiple responsibilities. It begins by retrieving the user ID from the database, then all of the user's orders. It then retrieves the most recent order together with its date and total amount, and finally it creates a UserInfo object and returns it. Alternatively, we should create shorter functions with single responsibility. A function for getting the user by its ID, another function for getting the recent order, and a third function that uses those 2 functions and returns the UserInfo object. Function structure. Functions should have a clear structure consisting of a single block of statements. The statements in a function should be organized with the most critical statements first and the least important statements last. Another aspect of function structure is the use of whitespace and indentation. Using consistent and well-organized whitespace can help make a function's code more readable and easier to understand. Finally, functions should have a single exit point. Let's see an example. This is a function to generate a random password. The function is named generatePassword and takes 3 arguments: length, which is a number, a boolean named includeNumbers, and a boolean named includeSymbols. The function body includes the logic for generating a random password based on the input arguments. This includes defining the character sets to use for the password, combining the character sets based on the input arguments, and generating the password string itself using a loop that selects random characters from the character set. The function body uses whitespace and indentation to clearly separate the different parts of the function. Blank lines are used to separate the different parts of the logic. And finally, the function exit by returning the generated password. Function complexity. Functions should be as simple as possible. A function should only be responsible for one thing and should not have multiple responsibilities. Here's an example. This function calculates the total cost of an order based on a shopping cart, customer information, and an optional discount code. A function is relatively long, with several separate steps that could potentially be split into separate functions. Although the function body uses whitespace and indentation to make the structure clear, but the overall complexity of the function makes it somewhat hard to follow. The function includes several separate steps to calculate the order total, including calculating the subtotal, applying discounts, calculating tax, and applying customer-specific discounts. The function uses several variables to store intermediate values, and the logic is fairly complex. Because of the length and complexity of the function, it can be difficult to understand and modify. It may be hard to keep track of the state of the function as it progresses through different steps. To improve the function complexity, we can break down the calculate order total function into smaller, more focused functions. Each of these functions should have a clear purpose and only be responsible for a single task. Here's one possible refactoring of the function. In this refactored version, we've broken down the original function into several smaller functions: calculate subtotal, apply discount, calculate tax, and apply customer discount. Each of these functions are responsible for a single task. This makes the code easier to read and understand, and also makes it more modular and reusable. The main function, calculate order total, now simply calls these smaller functions to calculate the order total. By reducing the complexity of the original function, we've also made it easier to modify and maintain. We've also made it easier to test each of the individual sub-functions, which can help to catch errors and improve the overall reliability of the code. Side effects and purity. Functions should have minimal side effects. A side effect is any change to the state of the program or the outside world. Functions with many side effects are harder to test and debug. Also, functions should be pure whenever possible. A pure function is a function that only depends on its input arguments and does not modify any external state. Pure functions are easier to test and reason about. Here's an example. The function add to total is adding a value to a global variable total. It is preferable to pass the variable and the quantity you wish to add, and then returns the final results. Documentation. Functions should be documented with clear and concise comments. Comments should describe what the function does, the input arguments, and the output. Here's an example. With these comments, modern IDEs will help you understand the function by just hovering over it. This is called JSDoc. JSDoc is a popular documentation format for JavaScript code that allows you to document the purpose and usage of functions, variables, and other code elements. JSDoc comments use a specific syntax to describe the types and descriptions of parameters and return values, as well as other metadata such as the function's name, visibility, and usage examples. JSDoc comments should generally be placed immediately before the code being documented. Each comment must start with a / and double asterisks in order to be recognized. More about comments will be discussed in another video. These are some of the key points to consider when writing clean functions in JavaScript. By following these guidelines, you can create code that is easier to read, test, and maintain. Remember to use meaningful names, keep the number of arguments to a minimum, limit the length of functions, structure functions with a clear organization. Also, keep functions simple, minimize side effects, strive for purity, and document your code with clear comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this. See you soon.